Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Dentistry Unmasked. I'm David Rice here as always with.
Hey everybody, Pam Maragliano. I am so excited for this week because I think one of my worst, I know we talked about cybersecurity, and that was like kind of one of my worst nightmares, that you're going to be audited by one of the insurance companies that you work with. I've heard nothing but horror stories about that. Haven't you heard the same thing?
I've never heard anything I really want to hear, so I think we're going to figure some things out today. We got a great guest, yes?
Yes, we do. Welcome, Justin Withrow. We're so happy to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. Really happy to be here.
So tell us a little bit about what you do. So if we were to get audited, we could call you and you could help us figure out this whole process, right? Because we probably shouldn't go at it alone.
No, and that's I'm gonna pick up on one key word that you said there, process, because audits are a process. And so when a practice receives an audit letter, that's the beginning of the process, of course. So having a plan and having a strategy as to what you as a practice owner or as a doctor who are identified on that audit notice are vitally important because without a plan, things are going to go poorly. And so that seems pretty simple. But what does a plan need to entail? So one, it starts by not going it alone, as you said, Pam. And it's important to, if not reaching out to a lawyer that you already have, perhaps exploring whether you have coverage under your malpractice policy. A lot of doctors think, well, malpractice, this isn't a malpractice case, so my policy probably isn't going to be much help to me. And that's actually not true. In my experience, many malpractice policies, whether you know it or not, have coverage of $25,000, $50,000 for professional fees and defense costs in billing reviews or audits. And that could be at a Medicaid level if you're a Medicaid practice, or it could also be at a PPO plan. So knowing who to reach out to and who to go to for help is step one. And then I think the next step is who within the practice is going to be your point person. As a doctor, you've still got to, treat patients, and the practice has to continue while this audit is ongoing behind the scenes. And so identifying a point person that your legal counsel can communicate with and has direct access to compile all the necessary records and get all the necessary information are really the two most important steps that need to be in place right away, and ideally are part of a plan that's already in place at the practice, whether you're undergoing an audit or not. This just needs to be part of a protocol that a practice has in place when, a situation arises. The necessary team members know who to call and know what to call them about.
How do how do audits come about? I mean, I've heard rumors, right? It's like they don't happen unless there's a disgruntled team member. They don't happen unless there's a disgruntled fill in the blank, but what are the common reasons they happen?
Yeah, I mean, those are certainly two sources for audits, but there's a whole host of others. I think, we live in a technological world where data and data analytics are so prevalent, and certainly in healthcare enforcement and healthcare regulatory environment that we're in. So knowing whether the numbers of a practice are going to make you stand out as a statistical outlier compared to other similarly situated practices in your geographical location. That is really what insurance companies are looking for. I was actually just talking to a now new client yesterday who acquired a practice roughly 2 years ago, and they acknowledged, like, look, since I've taken over the practice, our production has increased. I'm working more hours than the prior owner was working at the time that I bought the practice. So from an insurance company standpoint, what they see is a significant change in production, a significant change in claims, and perhaps most importantly, a significant change in dollars that they're paying out. But what they don't see is that, there's a new young doctor that's coming in that's hungry to, expand the patient base, is expending more resources into marketing to grow the practice. But what they see is, just a big change in dollars, codes, and claims. And so that puts an insurance company on alert to say maybe there's something that we need to look at here. Not necessarily because we think that the new owner's doing anything wrong, but because there's been such a change. Okay, so that's one way that it can happen. Certainly a disgruntled employee, a disgruntled patient. Those are other common ways as well. Sometimes they're random. In many provider contracts, providers agree that they're going to be subject to random audits. Now, you're never really going to know definitively what the source of the audit request is. But once you start looking into the patient records that they've identified, you'll get a pretty good idea is there a particular service? Are there particular codes? Is there certainly a particular time period that the insurance company is reviewing? Another good source is if you have particular claims or codes that are getting a high rate of denial, then the audit arms of these insurance companies may say, because of these repeated denials, we think we need to take a closer look to see what exactly is a practice or a doctor doing for a specific code.
That's an
What
interesting.
about it is, it's interesting. And I feel
Yeah.
like the other thing is sometimes these are codes that were already submitted and paid upon. Now they're doing an audit, and sometimes they tell dentists that they owe tens and tens and tens of thousands of dollars back. How does that happen when they've
Yeah,
already pre-approved it?
that's really the hardest part is, these audits come about and, frequently I'm engaged after the practice has decided to submit the records that have been requested for the 20, 30, 40 patients subject of the audit. And they get the initial findings letter back from the insurance company saying, here are all the things that we found that you've done improperly. Here are all the CDT code section, excuse me, where you haven't done things properly. And as a result of all this, you need to pay us back $50,000 and we'll take that check within 30 days, please. It, it's it's obviously, not something that a practice owner ever expects will be the outcome of, an audit. And so, one of the reasons why that happens is because you're not you're not submitting all the documentation when you submit a claim, right? So you're not submitting the treatment notes, you're not submitting radiographs. I mean, certainly when you need to get prior authorization, that does happen, but they're not getting those additional records to determine whether the service was, medically necessary or the documentation was in compliance with the regulations relating to that code. And so when these audits do happen, that's exactly what's under review. And when these insurance companies find that there are deficiencies in compliance with those regulations, that's when they ask for money back. And I think perhaps the biggest thing that dentists don't appreciate is that if the insurance company sees an error rate, meaning that let's say they request 30 charts, okay, and they see the same error in 27 of the 30 charts. So that's a consistent error rate of 90%. Well, many times an error rate of 90% or higher allows the insurance company to extrapolate out that error to records and patients and claims that are outside of the patients whose records they've requested for purposes of the audit. And so you can take a $25,000 problem and it turns into a $250,000 problem. And I actually had a client that was facing that exact circumstance around this time last year, where we were engaged after he got the initial findings letter back and it said, you owe us $247,000. And you have 30 days to appeal it, or we're going to start the recoupment process. And he was ready to shut it all down because he, of course, could not afford to pay that and was questioning what he was going to do, how he was going to get out of this mess that was really putting his practice and his future at risk.
It's
It's
really,
crazy to me.
yeah, like I feel like that's really hard because if you didn't have the correct documentation or you didn't have the correct representation, this could really harm your reputation, right? Like, I mean, because I mean, if you had to shut it down because of this, what would your patients think? Like, I just feel like that would be such an awful thing for an office to have to do.
Well, and it's getting worse than that, actually. What we're seeing here recently is that insurance companies are taking pretty aggressive positions regarding doctors and practices where they're, throwing around allegations of fraud and misrepresentation. And in certain circumstances, depending on what their findings are, they at times make referrals for criminal investigation, either through a state attorney general's office, or they even refer matters over to the licensing board to potentially take action against the doctor and their license. So that's also another big misnomer that, these audits aren't something that can expand beyond just the payback of money. They can, and I think insurance companies are utilizing their ability to audit and their ability to refer what they believe to be criminal behavior for additional investigation. And so, again, all the more reason why it's imperative to have a plan. It's imperative to have professionals that can guide you through the process to try to avoid finding yourself in a situation where either you have this huge repayment amount that is impossible for you to contemplate paying back, or you find yourself going from an audit to a criminal investigation or licensure investigation.
Do you find, and this might be a tough question for you to answer, but it feels like to me, listen, we have bad apples in dentistry. We have shitty dentists doing shitty things. And if you're one of those people and they're coming down on you, good. But is that who they're really coming down on, or are they just fishing for people and casting a wide net? Because I don't know. I find it really hard to believe somebody could go into the average dental practice and say 90% of your stuff is wrong. I just don't buy that.
Yeah, I don't buy it either. And so to answer your question, no. I find that there are an overwhelming majority of dentists are good dentists, good people that have either made bad decisions or don't know that they're doing something improper. And that's where education and training and constantly seeking to educate your team, not just you from a clinical standpoint, but your team on documentation, record keeping, understanding what your requirements are under provider agreements that you sign with insurance companies. You need to know what is expected of you. These are contracts. And so contracts have obligations. And when you don't satisfy your obligations, you can find yourself in breach. But at the same time, David,
Mhm.
it's so important that you have professionals that can police the insurance company. So going back to that client that I was referring to a moment ago about the $250,000, that was the initial finding. So we were hired at that stage, and it became pretty clear to us that the insurance company and the auditors were just flat out wrong on a variety of things. And so we put together a comprehensive appeal and we got back revised findings where the $250,000 number went down to 28,000. And obviously a huge success and significant reduction. And one of the main reasons for that is we were able to eliminate the extrapolation that the insurance company was trying to attach because of that high error rate. But even then, we got the findings back, and they were still making significant errors in making decisions where the documentation and the records of the practice were clearly supporting of the codes that were billed and paid. And so we kept going back at the insurance company saying, you've got this wrong, you've got this wrong. And in fact, just I would say it was roughly 6 weeks ago that we got our second updated audit findings report, and that initial $250,000 number went all the way down to $87.67. And
So
at that point in time, I said, let's put our swords away. Let's pay it, and you can move on with your life. But
yeah.
just stop and think about that for a second. A practice, and I'm not telling that story, in a braggadocious manner, but I'm telling that story because it's important, because sometimes practices go about these alone. And put a practice owner in that situation where it's a $250,000 overpayment that's being demanded back without counsel and without guidance. They may decide to just close up shop and move on to some other endeavor. But with the appropriate assistance, you can make sure that what the insurance company said you did wrong is accurate. And when it's not accurate, you need to be able to call them out on it. You need to be able to defend yourself. And the only way you can do that is by bringing on the right professionals to do so.
Now, can then not that, but can that dentist then go back and sue the insurance company for putting them through all that? Like, how is this? I mean, it just feels like pure stupidity.
It's a question I get after almost every audit
I
is,
want to
okay,
jump to
what
that.
are my rights and how do I go and sue the insurance company? And
Yeah.
I've yet to see a situation in which I advise a client, you should do so. One, because it's you versus insurance companies. The dollars on one side of the aisle versus the other there's a significant difference. The second reason is again, you are contractually obligated to participate in these audits. It's something that you agree to in these provider agreements. Absent, clear evidence that the insurance company knew they were wrong and continued to pursue a position in a repayment despite knowing that they were wrong, it's really not worth the time, energy, and money that an owner would have to expend to pursue a case against an insurance company. It really just isn't worth it. Instead, I'm frequently advising clients to just look, we've got a good outcome here. Let's move on. If you want to explore, terminating your provider agreement with that insurance company because this has left such a sour taste in your mouth, that's fine. And I can totally appreciate that. But expending more resources to try to, sue the insurance company, I don't think that's the right path forward.
All
So
right,
then
I'm
how
gonna
does dentistry police them? If there's no recourse, how do we police them?
It's a good question. And I think it's by doing the things that I do and, I do on a daily basis. We don't take the insurance company's position as gospel. We're constantly challenging, we're constantly fighting back and constantly defending, ourselves and our clients so that, the insurance companies have to come up with better systems and better protocols to, try to identify, those truly bad actors, those actors that are out there doing things improperly and they know they're doing things improperly. But again, I think unfortunately audits are a necessary evil because they do help to identify those bad actors. I think they could be better, but I don't think it's a system where they shouldn't exist altogether. And again, we want them. We never want to have to be a part of one because it's an uncomfortable, stressful, and the uncertainty of what can happen can bring a lot of sleepless nights. But these also help identify those truly bad actors and get them out of, the industry.
I feel like we need Erin Brockovich. We need somebody who's just gonna like serve as like a
Yeah.
Julia Roberts and Denzel, we're calling you back.
Yeah, we need you. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh, dentistry needs you. Well, let me ask you this. So that case that you shared,
Yeah.
that's pretty dramatic, going from 250K down to like
Sure.
$89. I would imagine that there's many that fall within a different type of spectrum. Would you say most cases that you pursue end up being dropped down significantly, or are there times where you're like, yeah, bro, you owe it? Like, I mean, what would you say your percentages are with dentists that are being audited?
It's a really good question. So I would say that in a vast majority of audits in which we are hired to assist, we're going to identify some errors by the insurance company. But there are absolutely cases in which we receive the audit findings, we review a sampling of the records that were produced to the insurance company as part of the audit. And we say, look, we tend to agree with what the insurance company is saying. And so that does happen. We're certainly not going to try to challenge audit findings if we don't feel we have a basis to do so. Instead, what we will do is say, okay, well, let's take a step back and figure out how we got here. Let's figure out what your documentation protocols are, what your record keeping protocols are, excuse me. And like, let's talk about some additional training for staff. We're not going to be able to help you here, but let's see if we can help you from being here again in the future. And that's in those situations, that's really all we can offer to do. It doesn't do a practice any benefit with the insurance company to, challenge or pursue an appeal of audit findings that have a basis. You're just, again, it goes back to we're spending more money and we're throwing good money after bad. So instead of trying to come up with creative challenges that are likely to be unsuccessful, let's figure out a system to prevent ourselves from being in this situation again.
Yeah, there's a pretty popular dental speaker who got put in prison for all of this, and then it came back and has been on like the speaking tour the last decade and a half to talk about this stuff.
Yeah.
I just being totally honest, like I still haven't made peace with the fact like that's possible without knowing bad things are happening. But I want to be proven wrong, but I don't buy it.
Yeah, I mean, it can be challenging. I mean, look, in the highly regulated area of healthcare, it there are certainly instances, and I know that the speaker that you're referring to, and there's a concept in the legal arena as willful blindness. You didn't know exactly what was happening, but you should have known what was happening, and you had an obligation to know. And sometimes it's called like the ostrich effect, where you stick your head in the sand. And that is clearly a legal theory that certain prosecutors, utilize in certain investigations and prosecutions. But those I think those are the exception and not necessarily the rule. I think where we see federal prosecutions, particularly in dentistry, where, compared to other areas of healthcare, the dollars are lower. And so that you tend to see federal investigations and federal prosecutions of dentists at a far lesser rate than other medical professionals, but they do happen. I mean, there was a dentist in Wisconsin who a few years ago was, sentenced to, I believe it was a 3.5 to perhaps 4.5 year federal prison term. And, the circumstances of that case is he was intentionally damaging patients' teeth so that he could perform crowns. And, that prosecution was initiated because he was a statistical outlier with, I believe it was Delta Dental, in his particular state, where he was such a high number of crowns and crown related restorative procedures that the insurance company, which again I think it was Delta Dental, but don't hold me to that, initiated audits and initiated reviews. And as that snowball started rolling down the hill, it resulted in a federal criminal investigation, prosecution, and he was incarcerated for, again, I think it was between 3.5 and 4 years. And that was 2 or 3 years ago, with millions of dollars of restitution owed. His license was revoked by the state licensing board, and his career as a dentist is, of course, over. His reputation is forever tarnished, and he will probably never come out from under a restitution order where a significant portion of his income, doing whatever he can moving forward as a federal felon will be garnished to help pay back those insurance companies for those claims that were paid improperly.
We had that guy in Buffalo, New York when I was there. Oberoi was his last name. I can say it. He's, did the time and all the things. It took them almost 20 years to take him down.
Wow. Wow.
Crazy.
Yeah. And
Like,
that's where investigators utilizing data analytics and, just the power of technology, I think has made those types of investigations to develop and put together against healthcare professionals far easier, but
yeah,
they still can take multiple years to really put together a case. And the federal government, certainly, and the Department of Justice, they don't bring charges until they are overly confident that they have all the evidence they need to convict. And then at that point in time, they will pursue charges. 20 years is highly unusual, but they can be lengthy investigations, oftentimes multiple years. Again, trying to compile all the evidence so that there's no way where they can, end an investigation and prosecution without a finding of guilt.
It's interesting because I feel like, when you talk about outliers and things that kind of flag the insurance company, there's this push towards comprehensive care and there's this push towards adhesive dentistry. And I feel that some of the dentists that pursue these continuing education curriculums are outliers from the standpoint of quality, but also the procedures that they're providing. So in a way, I feel like they could be, if they are participating in a plan, potentially setting themselves up to be noticed by an insurance company in their area just because they're leveling up their level of care. I would have to say that the use of AI, like an overjet or something like that, or you know, proper documentation. I mean, there's got to be ways that you can really protect yourself and protect your practice. Would you share some best practices to do so?
Yeah, absolutely. I am a huge proponent of internal and external periodic reviews. You have to be your own police force in a way. You have to be doing random chart reviews, looking at, running reports in your practice management software to identify what are the codes that we're billing most frequently? What are the codes that we're getting the highest denial rates on? And taking time both through internal processes. If it's a multi-doctor practice, one doctor should review the charts of another doctor. And it doesn't have to be every week. It could be once a month. It could be once every 2 months. It could be 10 charts. Again, but trying to keep yourselves honest, making sure that from a documentation, diagnosis, record keeping standpoint, that you agree with what's happening. And if you don't, then you need to implement internal corrective action. So that's one step. And then I think you do the same step with external sources. Bring in third parties. In the world of dentistry, there's countless numbers of consultants and professionals that can come in and do reviews of charts for compliance purposes to make sure that you're doing everything in compliance with the various provider contracts that you have. That's really it. And then beyond that, it's education. Constantly trying to educate yourself, either through listening to podcasts like this or attending, seminars. There's lots of education out there, and I know that folks like to go to seminar courses and talk about how we can, grow our profits 3x or 5x, or how to attract, new patients with, new marketing techniques or what have you. But you also have to try to identify courses where, there are topics that you need to hear, not necessarily that you want to hear, whether it be on, cybersecurity, as you mentioned at the beginning, or, changes to HIPAA and or, things like this, billing and record keeping and documentation, because that's ultimately if you're not doing those things properly, then it doesn't matter how many patients you attract. It doesn't matter how big your profits are because you're putting all of that at risk by not doing the compliance related things that you need to be doing to ensure that one, you have a license, two, that you have a practice, and three, that you're not under some investigation, either from an insurance company or from some other regulatory body. So internal systems, external sources, and education are really the three main ways that, doctors and practices can reduce the likelihood of an audit. You can never totally prevent it, but I think you can put systems in place to reduce it and also reduce the stress that comes with it. Because if you're doing these internal checks yourselves, you're going to know that, hey, if we get an audit letter, we have a general sense that we're in pretty good shape. We identified some deficiencies in the past. We've taken corrective action steps to improve in those areas. And so we don't really have anything to hide. We don't have anything to be worried about. So it's not the fun stuff, but it's the necessary stuff.
That's great advice. It's a great way to take us home, I think. No one wants to put new tires on a car and a new roof on the house, but those are the things that actually matter so we can then go out and do all the things we want to do. Pam, I don't know how 30 minutes cranks by so fast, but I'll tell you what, this was eye-opening for me today.
Yeah, I love this topic. This was awesome. Justin, thank you so much for joining us. And would you share how people can find you if they've got questions for you, how they can reach you?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me again. Really appreciate it. And I love talking about this topic and how we can help, doctors and practices stay out of trouble. So you can find me on the Google machine, Justin Withrow. I'm the partner at a law firm, Flannery George Alice. I won't try to spell that because I'll probably make a mistake. I try to be active in some of the Facebook groups. You can find me on LinkedIn, Facebook, or just Google my name and I should pop up somewhere on page one, hopefully. And always happy to have a conversation to see how I can help.
I love it.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us again. Everybody, thank you for joining us, and we will see you all next week.
Thank you, everyone, for watching or listening to the show this week. And thanks to our guests and sponsors on this episode.
Please check out our social media at Dr. Pamela_Maragliano and at Dental Economics Official.
Or you can check me out at Ignite DDS or at Dr. David Rice.
And go to dentaleconomics.com to receive dental economics. You can choose to receive DE in print or digitally, and you can also get the details of our Principles of Practice Management conference on our website.
If you have topics or guests or anything you'd like to talk about on the show, send us an email to dentistryunmaskedpodcast@gmail.com, and we will do our very best to make it happen. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week.